Alassian Born, Chapter 4, Part 2, Waking. When he next awoke, Tawori asked that he follow him outside. He stood at once from the bed, but at the door he hesitated. He had the vague notion of some worry which had troubled him not long ago, though now he did not remember what that had been. Tawori waited unhurriedly, his white gaze watching him. They walked through a lighted corridor lined with open doors. The Falin led the way to a bright room furnished with strange objects of polished ceramic and metal, with bottles, brushes, and towels. This was a washroom, he guessed, but it was very strange. He could not tell what most of the things were for. The Falin showed him how to use some of the items to produce a paste for the toothbrush from a colorful glassy tube, to squirt the liquid soap from a rounded bottle, to start and stop a stream of water. "It will come out heated if you turn the knob like so," Tawori said. "I'll leave you to it. I shall be just outside. If you need help, make yourself heard." He stood under the hot rain for a long time. It was pleasant. His fingers traced the scars on his arms, his torso, his legs. Feeling the raised damaged skin beneath his fingertips made him pant with the expectation of pain. But the scars didn't hurt, and eventually his mind caught up to the present moment. His body stopped shaking, and his breathing relaxed. He dried himself with a blue towel, then put on the soft white ash cotton clothes the Falin had left for him. They fit his thin body loosely and covered the length of his arms and legs. Long arms and legs, he observed. He wasn't nearly as tall as Tawori, but surely he was tall. Somehow that was strange. Yet even stranger was the face of the young Falin who looked at him from the square mirror on the wall after he had wiped off the steam. His bony cheekbones, his right brow, the bridge of his nose, and his thin lips were scarred with deep rugged lines, darker than the pale undamaged skin. His nose and mouth were small, and his eyes were sad. He asked himself whether he felt sad. He did not think so, not right now. It was stillness he felt in his heart, and in his mind dull emptiness. There had been fear. It kept coming back, suddenly and unexpectedly. But when there was no fear, there was nothing. The door of the bright room slid ajar, and a cautious utterance came from outside. "Are you well in there?" Or perhaps there was a relief, perhaps a longing, a yearning for something he had forgotten. On their way back, a short walk down the lit corridor, the Falin paused twice to wait for him, as he steadied himself with a hand pressed against the wall, fighting a sudden dizziness that blackened his vision. He was exhausted and out of breath by the time they returned to the room. A plate with food had been brought in their absence: fish, potatoes, and cooked vegetables. He ate quickly, wholly immersed in the rich piney flavor. Then he lay back dozing. Later, he stood by the window with his feet tucked in a pair of white laceless shoes. He watched the coming and going of humans outside. There were many of them, all with their hair hidden beneath small hats and wearing identical grey and brown clothing, the same as Tawori's. When the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the Falin told him they should take a walk in the hospital's corridors. Hospital was the name of this healing house. It was a vast building with 3 floors. His room, like many others, was on the middle floor. All the rooms had the same wooden doors that opened to the same white walls, small windows, and brown polished stone floors. The same blue sheets covered the same thin mattresses in the same metal bed frame. There were no Alassians about, only humans, men and women. Most of the men had very short hair, he noticed. If he met their gazes, the humans turned their faces away, although not their minds. Those stared wearily and followed his passing closely. He felt out of place, like the spiky glass that poked the dry land outside. He made sure to stay close to his guide, keeping 2 steps behind him at all times. The Falin stopped often to let him catch his breath, as he tired quickly. A few times they sat to rest on the small chairs that lined the hallways. To the busy corridors he preferred the quiet calm of his room, and he was glad when they returned to it at last. The following day, in the late afternoon, a man he had not seen before came to the room. His face was pink and puffy, his hair was thick and copper red, and his eyes were like the blue sky. He wore a friendly smile, but his mind was tense and preoccupied. He spoke with Tawori in the human tongue, and the Falin grew anxious. The man came to stand by the bed and said that his name was Liu. He spoke Alassian with a graceless, slothful accent and mispronouncing some of the words, though well enough to be understood. "I know you don't want to talk," he said. "Or maybe you can't. I need you to try to communicate with us. Will you do that?" The man waited a moment, then continued. "We need to know who you are. Do you know what your captors were doing in that place? Celigor, you call it, right?" Liu glanced at Tawori, who nodded stiffly. "Do you know why you were there? Do you know what they wanted from you?" There was a long silence. The man's blue eyes studied him expectantly. "Can you write?" He did not know whether he could. The man spoke the other tongue and walked to the door. He came back to the bed holding a small book and a pen and offered them to him. He took the pen with his left hand and knew that was his writing hand. It was an odd pen made of a transparent hexagonal tube filled with a thin black straw and a metal tip at one end. The book found its way in his lap, open to an empty page. He held the pen suspended above it, metal tip pointing downward. "Can you write something? Can you write hello? Or draw anything? Can you at least try?" Slowly, the man's hopeful gaze turned into a frown. "We need to know if you are a target. Do you understand what I mean by that? Is there someone out there looking for you?" He said something in the human tongue quickly and impatiently. Tawori replied briefly. "I didn't mean to scare you," Liu continued. "You're safe here. We want to protect you as best we can. That is why we need information. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying?" Liu left the room unsatisfied, leaving behind a notebook and pen. Day turned slowly into evening. He was offered food and ate it. He was led to the washroom and went there. After the lights were put out, he sat in bed awake, book and pen still at hand. It was the darkest hour of the night when he slipped his feet into the laceless shoes and stood up. He gazed at Tawori, who sat awake in his chair. The Falin replied with only the utmost silence. He took that for consent and walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside into the soft light of the corridor. A human was standing there, and there had been many over time, all standing, waiting, and feeling bored. The human looked at him nervously, puzzled by his being there with an empty hand lifted in an obvious gesture of asking. The man took some time to react, but eventually lifted his own hand in the same way. He took the man's hand in both his own, slowly, so as not to cause him alarm. Through the warm touch he felt a human's life force flow steadily and strong, and with a swift backing movement of both hands, he wrenched that strength from him. The man collapsed, but his body never hit the ground. For an instant he thought Tawori had moved to attack. Instead, the Falin caught the falling man and lowered him safely to the floor. He pressed 2 fingers on the human's neck for a troubled moment, then looked up and said, "Are you sure that you are ready for this?" He did not reply. He turned and headed down the corridor toward the stairs. The Falin followed him a moment later. He had walked these corridors for 2 days and knew his way about. He noticed now that no room beside his own was guarded, and vaguely pondered that matter as he listened for the sleeping minds beyond the closed doors. Walking as quietly and as quickly as he was able, he descended the stairs to the empty corridor below, pulled open a heavy door and took left. Then he froze. A wakeful mind was approaching. One of the doors on his right was ajar. Behind it 2 people slept. He hurried inside and pressed his back to the wall. Tawori squeezed beside him. Soon, a woman walked past the door. He waited until she moved out of sight, then slid back into the corridor. He turned a corner into the long hallway leading to the entrance, a white glass door with white vertical bars. Through it, he could see 2 humans standing a couple of steps from the building, with their backs partly turned to it, conversing. Black weapons hung from their shoulders and onto their chests. He had seen other humans wield the same weapons, and by now knew them for what they were, though he did not know what power they held. "They will not be fooled by childish tricks," Tawori said quietly beside him. "We have to be swift. I will deal with the one on the right. The other will intervene and be distracted. You do with him as you did upstairs, quickly, and nothing else. Do not harm either of them." The Falin cast a hard glance at him. He nodded. They reached the door unnoticed. Tawori put both hands on the bar that would open it, then pushed, dashing forward like a jaguar. His arms came up around the right man's neck in a chokehold. The second man reacted, but Tawori, turning his victim to one side, kicked him in the shins, making him stumble and drop a knee to the ground. That was his cue. He hurried for the kneeling man, a tap on the shoulder, a tug at his life force, and unconsciousness. In Tawori's hold, the other human struggled a moment longer, then became still. All was silent. Ahead of them, grey empty ground extended for 100 feet to a shielded fence with a closed gate. Light from the hospital reached as far as the fence. Beyond that was only the dark of night. "This way," said Tawori, taking a step not toward the gate, but along the hospital walls. He hesitated. He looked at the Falin and then at the gate. "Come, Nilith. Come this way." He followed. They walked around the building to a place where the fence bent into a sharp corner close to the wall. The Falin helped him climb and get over the spiked lines at the top. Then he pulled himself up and down the other side with ease. "This way. We must be quick now." They went sneaking, walking, then running, and walking again, trailing on slowly. Sand and long-lived spiky bushes covered the ground as far as the eye could see. He turned once to look behind. The hospital was nowhere to be seen. "How do you feel? Can you go on a little longer?" He trudged ahead with growing fatigue, watching the ground pass unchanged beneath his feet. The night air chilled him. "Walk next to me," said Tawori. "I don't want you falling unconscious." "We're going to the sea," he continued after a while, pointing in the distance. Look, it isn't much farther. He looked and saw a flat expanse beyond the sand and dry vegetation, dark water fading into black sky. They were going to the sea. He would walk for a while longer and he would reach the sea. He kept on walking, eyes fixed on the water, one heavy step after the other. At last they came to a group of houses, no lights, small paths between the houses, then a tiny beach. 3 small boats were lined up near the water. "Climb inside," said the Fallen. "You'll have time to watch the sea as we go. We are, borrowing this without asking, so we want to be quick about it. Yes, sit down there where it's safe." The water sloshed against the boat's hull as the Fallen worked the paddle and the coast moved away. "You should rest. Sleep if you can. They won't know where we've gone. We're safe now. You can trust me." He was nodding off with exhaustion, curled up against the hard wood of the boat. He forced his eyes to open and met the Fallen's gaze. "Sleep, Nilith." He slept. Far from the coast, Tawori drew in the paddle and turned the motor on. His passenger did not stir, and his sleep, for once, appeared to be dreamless and calm, perhaps thanks to the sea's embrace or to the watchful stars of the night sky. In the early hours of the morning, back on land where the Alliance base of Oxwish stands obstinate against the cold, dry desert, a nurse found the man unconscious on the floor of a small hospital room. He was alive and unharmed, but the patience of that room was long gone. On the bed a notebook lay open to the first page. On it, written in black ink, were 3 words of the Alassian tongue. "Nur enven ruhira." Thank you.